Hello, friends. I'm Dawn. Welcome to Read Through the Word. It's so great to have you here today. Today we're talking about 1 Samuel chapter 13 and 14 and digging into a somewhat sad story of a king who was chosen, was anointed, and maybe had so much promise and is already making some bad decisions. So let's dive in here today. Today is April 12th and Saturday, April 12th, and our key verse today is 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 6. Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." So much behind that verse. There's so much happening that we're going to talk about today behind just that one verse. So we're going to start out by backtracking a little bit to chapter 13, and we're going to talk about Saul. We're going to talk about what happened with him, and we're going to contrast that with Jonathan in the and the key verse for today. So we know in 1 Samuel chapter 13 that the Philistines had been attacked by Jonathan, and it said that Israel had become a stench to the Philistines, and people were summoned to join in more battles, more fights. In 1 Samuel 13, verse 5, it talks about this, this mass army of the Philistines, just a greatly superior army to the Israelites. And it said, when the men of Israel saw their situation was critical, they hid in caves and thickets among rocks and pits and cisterns. So it does talk about a little bit about Michmash, and parts of the story happen in Gilgal and then later parts in Michmash. Michmash was a very mountainous terrain, and so it was difficult for it to have chariot warfare there, but because it was mountainous terrain, there were little pits and cisterns and places for people to hide. So in this area too, in the area of Gilgal, so they're hiding. And some Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Some remained, it said Saul remained at Gilgal. And all the troops with him were quaking with fear. So they're afraid. There's battles happening with the Philistines. There's more coming. The Philistines are gearing up to fight again. And the Israelites are afraid. And Saul is supposed to wait for Samuel to come. Supposed to wait 7 days for Samuel to come so there can be a burnt offering. And he's supposed to wait 7 days. And he doesn't. 1 Samuel 13, verse verse 9 says that Saul basically, he's waiting, and the men are beginning to scatter, right? So these people are starting to they're trembling, they're afraid, they're not sure what's going on, and there's this length of time, and they're starting to scatter. And so in verse 9, it says, Saul just says, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And he's like, "I'm just going to do this myself." And so then when Samuel comes and he sees that Saul has done that, he's like, "What have you done? This is, you have acted foolishly. You have not kept the command the Lord God gave you, and your kingdom will not endure." So it's really hard for us, I think, to just look at this verse by itself and really understand the gravity of what it was like culturally, historically, and part of the history of the Israelites and of God's work in them. So in the Bible background commentary, one of the things it talks about is in the ancient Near East, how offering a sacrifice to enlist a deity's favor before an impending battle was common in the ancient Near East. And so this wasn't something new. And we've talked about this before, that there are a lot of cultural things that were a part of the Israelites' worship that were similar to other cultures and pagan cultures, but that God continually intervenes and gives commands and speaks and in such a way to say, I'm different, I'm above all gods, and I'm different from these other gods. But still, some of the practices did have similarities. And this was one of them. And so Saul knows he has to somehow gain the favor of God, or, try to ensure God on his side, try to ensure God's participation or willingness in this battle so that they can fight. And it feels timely to Saul. His men, the people who are supposed to fight, are being afraid. They're hiding. They're starting to scatter. There's a timeliness about this for Saul. And so it's easy to just say, oh yeah, Saul was just selfish. He just wanted to do it himself. He wasn't patient, whatever. But again, putting ourselves in, as much as we can from our modern Western culture, putting ourselves in that position of Saul and him saying, this is what we do. We get God's favor before we fight, and we're going to lose. I'm going to lose my men. People are getting afraid. This isn't going to go well. I've got to do something here. He wanted to try to gain some kind of advantage, right, by getting the favor of God before entering into, military conflict. Now, it's interesting too that when Samuel calls out Saul for doing this, he says, you have not kept the command of the Lord your God. And so some responses I'm seeing talk about how Saul took on the role of a priest when he shouldn't have. I know that is a possibility, and we're not saying it's not, but when we look at the text, that is not a for sure thing. The text does not specifically say that Saul took on a priestly role and he shouldn't have. It could have been part of it. What we do know is that Samuel commanded Saul to wait 7 days, and he didn't. Another reason that we can't definitively say that that's true is that later in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 20, chapter 24, verse 24, David goes to the threshing floor and he builds an altar and to the Lord, and sacrifices burnt and fellowship offerings. And did that in response to Gad, the prophet Gad had encouraged him to, that was under the encouragement. So David was being obedient. So it's really difficult to say Saul was just taking on a role he shouldn't have, because David did take on that role in some ways as well. The king-priest role wasn't always completely divided down a line. The difference is that Saul was given very strict instructions by Samuel that he was to wait. So the actual sacrifice part of it seems to be less of the issue than listening to Samuel's command to wait. Okay, now this was interesting to me. Just a little bit later, Jonathan and his armor bearer in chapter 14, Jonathan decides to go up with this armor bearer to where the Philistines were camped out. And he says, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. And the armor bearer says, like, do it. Go ahead. I'm with you. The reason why that was so interesting to me is there was this command to Saul to wait these 7 days. You have to wait, right? There was a purpose for it. Samuel was very, specific about, you need to wait until I get there. Wait the 7 days. But then Jonathan just goes up and he says, let's try it. I mean, really, for all intents and purposes, he's basically saying, perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. He didn't consult. He didn't consult a prophet. He didn't consult a priest. He didn't consult Samuel. He didn't really consult anybody. He just said, I think we should do this because maybe we'll be victorious. And you just wonder, why was that okay? But what Saul did wasn't. And I think it all comes down to many lessons that we talk about, and many, I guess the sort of the foundation of so many different lessons that we see throughout the Old and New Testament, and it comes down to the person's heart. Saul's heart was saying, I cannot wait to obey this command. Things feel too intense. I'm going to head and get God's favor without Samuel. He wasn't, again, culturally, he wasn't ignoring God. In his mind, he wasn't ignoring God. He was saying, I've got to get God's favor. We've got to go to battle. There's a timeliness here. But ultimately in his heart, was there this full trust that I know things feel tight. I know I feel pressured, but I am going to wait and I'm going to trust, what God has commanded through Samuel. I'm going to trust it and I'm going to wait. And with Jonathan, we don't see this big, you need to wait, you need to do this. He just kind of does it. But we know Samuel's heart too, don't we? That he wasn't acting for his own glory. He wasn't trying to be impatient. There wasn't this sense of like, I have to do this in my way, my time. I think he was with a heart toward God, with a heart of trust in God, saying, I think that God will bring us the victory, because his heart had been right with God. His heart had been aligned with God's purposes. And they were victorious. He and his armor bearer were victorious. And not long after that, the Philistine army is brought into confusion. Saul and his men come along and can continue the fight, join in on it. And so it's just so amazing to me to look at the distinction between the two. And it also reminds me of, it kept making me think of one of my very favorite verses, Isaiah 40, verses 29 through 31. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. I think the difference between Saul and Jonathan was there was a heart that was willing to wait, willing to listen, willing to trust in God. And so when it was time to go, when it was time to move, when it was time to do something, Jonathan's heart was ready for that and went forward in a way that was honoring to God. Whereas Saul was more acting out of kind of a fearful angst and anxiety of, I've got to kind of grab the bull by the horns here and do this on my own because it's not working out how Samuel told me it would, or how God commanded it would. So I just think that's interesting for us to think about in our own lives. There are times where God says, you need to go, you need to do this. And there's times where he's saying, I know how crazy this looks right now. I need you to trust. I need you to not push ahead and try to strive and force something to happen. I need you to wait. So both things happen in our life sometimes. Sometimes we feel all anxious and I need like a sign from the sky, right? Like I need so much, I need all this confirmation or I'm not going to move forward. And God might be going, your heart is right. Just go, just do it, move forward, take the risk. And there's also times where God's saying, wait, even though it looks hard and you want to take it into your own hands. And we learn this by, again, digging into the text of Scripture each day so we can learn. We learn a lot by the people in the text that don't do what they're supposed to do, as well as those who do what they're supposed to, right? So we learn from these examples. We also just learn from our own personal relationship with Jesus, from our own personal conversations, from spending time in prayer and not just talking, but listening. Having a heart that's connected to Jesus so that we're able to discern when to wait and when to go. Thanks for joining me here today, friends, and we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.